Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant. Today, I'm going to be talking about a book I bought at Coas well over a decade ago. I want to say almost 2 decades ago. And at the time, I could have sworn it was used, but I see no indication of price writing anywhere else. And I did buy this in 2009 or 2010, which means it could have been new. I think it was used. I can't be certain at this point. I am talking about the book The Animal Dialogues. This is a book written by Craig Childs, who also wrote The Secret Knowledge of Water, which I don't think I've covered on this channel, but I have read and it's sitting on my shelf. So, as you can see, the cover, the binding, really damaged. I've had this for 16 years, I want to say. Well over half my life. And, well, not well over. I've had it for over half my life. And I've read it. I've brought it on a lot of trips. I've read it many times. And I really enjoy it. This book was something that kind of inspired me to get out to New Mexico eventually, and I did eventually, like I said. Nowadays I work and live in New Mexico. At the time, I was trying to go to school out here. I was trying to find summer jobs out here, and it wasn't until 2018, 2019 that I was able to succeed in finding a job out in New Mexico. And there's ups and downs with those, with that place, and there's some stories about that. But this book and Craig Childs' wanderings in the wilderness is what inspired me to come out west from the East Coast. I recently read one of David Quammen's books, Wild Thoughts from Wild Places, which was a collection of his essays and submissions to his column in Outside Magazine. And in it, he mentions how he knew Edward Abbey, how he knew Doug Peacock, how he knew some of these other important wilderness writers, nature writers, wilderness guides, that kind of thing. And it got me thinking about Craig Childs, who is a bit of a newer generation. He wasn't active at the same time as Rick Bass, as David Quammen, as Doug Peacock, Terry Tempest Williams, to a degree Pam Houston, Edward Abbey, or even, to throw out another example, Gary Paul Nabin or Harley G. Shaw. These are people that have been exploring and writing about the Rocky Mountains, whether it's Montana, Utah, Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico. These are people that have a lot of experience writing about those states. But Craig Childs was only born in 67, so by the time he was even a teenager, Edward Abbey and that crowd were already famous, or to some degree they were famous, they were known, they were writing, they were exploring the Southwest. By the 90s, when Craig Childs first started getting into writing, they were already established authors and writers. David Quammen, Rick Bass were journalists, but they were already in those circles. Terry Tempest Williams was already a published author at that point. Gary Paul Nabin was also an established writer. Harley G. Shaw. These were already people that were doing their work in the 70s through the early 2000s. So Craig Childs is a younger generation, but he kind of carries the torch in a way that I really respect. And I would say, if I were to think of someone who kind of carries that spirit on in a more modern generation, I think his name is Connor Knighton. Connor Knighton is the author of Leave Only Footprints, which I've talked about on this channel a couple years ago. That's the story where he went out to each national park. If any of you know CBS Sunday Morning News, CBS Sunday Morning used to do this show where it was an hour long and they would talk about a really focused kind of subject. And what they were doing in this case was Connor Knighton was going around the country to visit all of the national parks during the 100th anniversary of the National Park Service. And he was doing every week a new segment on the Sunday morning news about that park that he visited and a little bit of information about it. So I think Craig Childs is kind of a middle ground between Connor Knighton's more modern day author and modern day spirit, and Rick Bass, David Quammen, Doug Peacock, Terry Tempest Williams, Edward Abbey's 80s and 90s. Craig Childs was kind of bridging that gap, and he's written a lot of really good books, nonfiction, about his adventures, but also about the relationship between the people of the Southwest and water, and of the ancestral Puebloans, and a couple other pretty important books. So what he discusses in the animal dialogues is that each chapter is a focused view, a specific interaction of Craig Childs with that animal. And one that I really, really love is one that has been a fun fact I bring up at parties, or cocktail party kind of things, and that is that porcupines have a mild antibiotic coating on their quills, American porcupines. And what he discusses in the chapter about it is that American porcupines fall out of trees pretty frequently and at a higher rate than other animals. And why that matters is that they often quill themselves. They often get their quills into themselves. And that could be dangerous if they're constantly getting holes in themselves. So instead, they developed ways to remain healthy. So that story opens with him taking porcupine quills out of his dog's mouth, and at the top of the last page of that chapter it says, "Why antibiotic quills? If you are going to stab your enemy, it makes little sense to clean your knife first. The purpose lies elsewhere than in the well-being of a quill-infested coyote muzzle." Knowing that porcupines are adept at removing self-impaled quills, Rose, R-O-Z-E, set out to find whether accidental self-mutilation is common among porcupines. He went to museums and studied their skeletons. Rose found healed skeletal injuries on about 35% of porcupine skeletons. Just to make sure, he checked other animals. 10% of raccoons had similar injuries, and 7% of woodchucks. Porcupines, it appears, are good at hurting themselves. Being famous tree climbers, but equally famous dullards, they must be cracking their skeletons by falling out of trees. Thus, antibiotic quills. You have enough problems if you fall 30 feet out of a tree. If you survive that, you don't want to die of infected stab wounds from your own quills. And that's one that stuck with me for years. But there's also stories about peregrine falcons, hawks that he's experienced, ravens, where he talks about going on a exploration into I want to say it's Utah or northern Arizona canyonlands, and he's off in the wilderness with a friend, and they have a base camp. At the campsite, they are going to hang out every evening and every morning, but during the day, their wanderings, they'll go off trail and just explore in different areas, and they're not necessarily going to follow the same path. They're going to go in different directions, and at the campfire talk about what they found. It's something that I've really wanted to do with people for a long time in the Gila National Forest, the Gila wilderness areas, just to do that and explore that beautiful and nation's first wilderness area. But what he discusses in that chapter about ravens is how he ends up finding a canyon that the entrance to it from a distance is kind of like very narrow, and maybe like this, where the entrance is hidden by the angle of the cliff. But as he goes in, he ends up finding a bunch of ravens with nests along the walls and a single rock with a feather underneath it. And what he then goes on to do is go back and tell his friend about that. His friend wants to go check out that canyon too, so they go back and explore it. And as the two of them are standing in that area, again with a bunch of ravens watching, they find more than just one feather. They find a lot of rocks with feathers underneath them. And they're all not raven feathers, but owl feathers. And owls have a well-known kind of beef with ravens, where owls and ravens will, like, owls will hunt ravens, and because of that, ravens will generally attack owls on sight. So he ends up finding this canyon, finding this spot with all these owl feathers underneath it, and what they assume, because again, they can't know this for certain, but what they assume is that at one point in time, these ravens fought an owl. And as kind of a marking to other owls, or just as a way to commemorate that event, all these plucked feathers had rocks placed on top of them so that these rocks would hold down those feathers. It kind of reads, in a way, ritualistic, which is a bit of anthropomorphization and generally considered unscientific to discuss in that way without having research to back it up. But what he almost makes a case for is that the ravens have ritual. They have that kind of memory about a fight, a big important moment in that nest's lifespan. And so there's a story about Craig Childs driving a truck through Arizona, and he stops at a truck stop. He goes in, and then because he has enough time, he goes and explores beyond the reach of the fence. And I can think of a couple rest areas where I could do that, though technically climbing on the rocks is illegal. Whenever I stop through, I want to say it's the Texas Canyon rest area on I-10, every time I stop through there, I think I just want to hop that fence and explore the rocks behind it. But that's illegal. So I don't do it. But I don't know which exit Craig Childs stopped at. But what he did was he went out and explored and found a canyon with a pool of water that had come here mostly through rain runoff, and the way the bowl was shaped, something that anything that didn't have wings couldn't get in and back out. It was a bowl all around, and the lip kind of curved inward, so it would be difficult to pull yourself out of the bowl. But it wasn't so deep that a human couldn't reach down into that bowl and reach the water. But what he discusses is that he finds a raccoon that is trapped in that water. And being a human, or I don't know, maybe animals would do this too, but he does what he can to get this raccoon out of the water. When it dies, it could eventually foul that water. But also, why let it die in the first place if you can save it? And so he goes back to his truck. He gets an old shirt. He puts the raccoon on like a pizza box as well as a shield. And then he fishes. He scoops this raccoon out of the hole and gets it out, and then releases it into the wild. And that's just a really cool story about, wilderness exploration and finding a cool animal out there. And on my own desert wanderings, I've seen the carcasses of deer and sometimes wondered what caused that deer to be there. I remember there was one experience I had while working at the summer camp back in 2018. I had a day off, and so I wanted to explore the wilderness area that was directly south of the camp, that you would just hop a fence and already be into the wilderness. And a few weeks, I think a month earlier during the staff training period, we had been given a task of crossing about 6 miles, and were given the ranges of don't walk on this road, don't walk in this, don't cross this stream bed. Otherwise, overland travel from point A to point B being back at the fence, and then once at the fence, back to the dining hall. And while we were out there, my group, our decision was to go through the canyon, the stream bed. But it got so thick and overgrown that we couldn't do that. But somewhere along the way, what we decided was once we got out of that stream bed, we would just follow the river, the stream bed from the top of the canyon. And when we were doing that, we found an old railroad bridge out there. And on my day off a month later, I thought, I should find that railroad bridge, because I don't know that we lead any programs to it, but it's only about a 6 mile round trip thing. Younger kids could easily do that kind of activity. Go out there, explore the forest, come back, and maybe contextualize the history of the area with that bridge. And when I was out there exploring on my day off, I ended up stopping to rest at on a tree stump, and then seeing a bone about 20 feet away, and it was right up against a tree. So I went to look at it, and up against this tree about this wide, this tree was on the ground, and it was big enough that it could hide something. And I look over it, and it's too big to be a mule deer carcass, probably an elk carcass that is just nudged up against the tree so that the spine is kind of where the tree trunk meets the ground. And I saw this jawbone that was way too big to be a mule deer's, but not the right kind to be a cow's. And I saw a couple of the legs were still there and had some tendons on it that clearly hadn't been broken for marrow, but it looked like most of the meat was gone, but some of it could still be come back. You could probably get a mouse chewing for a bit of calcium, something like that. And so I looked up and I realized, I think I'm at a mountain lion kill. It was kind of hidden by leaves and dirt. And so I thought, this is old, but a mountain lion has been here. And that got in my head thinking about the animals that were in that forest, the elk, the mountain lions. And that's the kind of stories that Craig Childs talks about in this book, The Animal Dialogues. And like I said, this book inspired me to come out to the West, to New Mexico, to the Rocky Mountains. And that moment lived in my head as something I really want to do, off-trail exploration, because I want to have that kind of life where I have those kinds of stories. I don't know that I'll ever write all of my stories down so that someone else can read them, but Craig Childs thought that his stories were good enough that he could that he could write it down and other people could read it. And Craig Childs, wherever you are, if you ever happen to see this video, thank you for writing this book, because you changed my life with this book and set me on a path, on a direction that I have followed for well over a decade. So I really, really, really love this book. I cannot express enough how much I love it. And I think if you like any of the nature writing that I've talked about on this channel before, The Animal Dialogues is going to be something you want to read. So, yeah, my name is Wild Stag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant.